I was sitting at the table, drinking a cup of coffee, and thinking that 5 o'clock would be a little while off, and suddenly someone reminded me it's 4 o'clock this service is, so I left out a cup of coffee on the table thing. Good to be with you this evening. And to kind of wrap up the things we've been talking about this weekend, and I'd like to just invite your attention to some things that should be very basic to most Christians in regard to the subject of family. But before I can really start into issues about addictive families, I really need to start with where baseline is, and that is God's Word. So I'm going to say some things very quickly here in terms of the home as God would have it. But I want to say in the very beginning is, in terms, the topic tonight is the addicted family. And until the pain of the addiction becomes greater than the pleasure of the addiction, the addict will remain in their addiction. And what this calls for in the family setting is a setting where there is some tough love going on, where there are some decisions and boundaries that are set and set pretty tight in the family for the good of the persons who are addicted or who are exploiting the family. And so we want to start tonight with that idea in mind. But let's do just a brief overview of the family and the home as God would have it. And then we'll get into some of the dysfunctions that take place, that can take place in the addicted families. To begin with, God has designed, Genesis 2, verse 18 through 24, and Matthew 19, 2 through 10, God has designed that male and female are to pair off. And that is one male and one female together for life until death breaks the bond. That's God's plan for the home. When the home follows that plan, then what we have is a place of security, a place where there is an oasis in the storm, a refuge where we can go and find comfort and love and help from those that are closest to us. That's how God has designed the family. He's not designed it to be free of conflict, because we actually grow by conflict, although it doesn't feel like it at the time. But we grow through our conflicts and through our struggles, and that's actually how we gain the strength and the bonding that takes place in the family, as well as through the triumphs that we go together, or that we go through together in the family. But the home as God has designed it is designed to weather whatever storm, and the thing that holds the marriage together is not always the romantic stuff. I hear crazy statements made. I haven't figured out some of them yet. But I love him, but I'm not in love with him. And it's like, I don't know what that means. And I have people try to tell me that, but it sounds like gobbledygook to me. Because really, the home life is not so much about romance as it is about commitment. And once we have the commitment that we are together for life, it doesn't matter what hits that family will get through it, as long as the commitment remains in place. And that's what God intends, is for homes to be held together by the glue of commitment, not the facade of romance. Romance comes in waves. It'll come and go, and when it's there, it's great. When it's not there, it may not be so great, but it's there. But the marriage is committed anyway. And hopefully nobody in the marriage gets committed. That's another story. But the role of the wife in the marriage, as the Bible depicts it, is the wife is to receive honor. And in some marriages, wives don't receive the honor that they deserve from their husbands. The position of being a wife is a position of honor, according to 1 Peter 3 and verse 7, where husbands are told to give honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, being joint heirs together of the grace of life. Here's what this means, guys. If you ever go down to the florist and buy like a potted plant that's got this tinfoil around it, it's all colorful and all, take that tinfoil off, and you know what's under there is a whole clay pot. That's you guys. Okay? Guys, you're just an old clay pot. But you go to the same florist and you look up on the shelf, and here's this beautiful vase. Or vase for those of us who speak English. But there's this beautiful piece of glass up on the shelf. And it's somewhat fragile. And that's, you women, that the woman is made in such a way that she is more delicate in nature than the man. The man's rough around the edges, the woman's more delicate. The two create kind of a comparison and contrasting, the two, get this right, the two together make a contrast that helps to make the home what God wants it to be. The woman is to be properly adorned, according to 1 Peter 3, verse 3 through 6, and her adorning is to be not just the outward person, but to be the inward beauty of holiness, and to create yourself from the inside out. I've seen a number of people in my life. Some are pretty, and some are ugly, and some are pretty ugly. Because on the outside they may be beautiful, but on the inside they might be like those Pharisees that were just full of dead men's bones. I see some very vain people, both males and females, out there in the world in which I live. And maybe you've seen them too. But the wife is one that is to be properly adorned with the beauty of holiness. She is to be treated as the weaker vessel, not in the fact that she is weaker, but that she is like a weakling, but in the sense that she is more fragile. And what that means is that husbands need to dwell with their wives and treat them according to knowledge. And that is knowledge of who she is, knowledge of kind of where, what was going to set her off and what's going to make her happy, and to spend some time with your wives. There are a number of homes where the husband is absent. And in those homes, it gives birth, it creates a seedbed for all kinds of disruption in the home, from the children, and especially as those children begin to experiment with their drugs. Also, absence doesn't necessarily make the heart grow fonder. Absence may make us start looking around for somebody else. And so we need to spend some time together with our families and create a cohesive bond. Marriages are not intended to be a parallel process where we kind of pass each other at the door on the way in and out. Marriages are intended to be a bonding process where we are glued together and where we have time to spend together and to build a quality relationship. The husband is intended to be the primary provider in the family. In 1 Timothy 5:8 we looked at several times, and there it says that if any would not provide for his own, and especially those of his own household, he has denied the faith, and he's worse than a heathen, than an infidel. So the husband is to be the provider, and from that we draw the conclusion that the husband is the primary breadwinner in the home. There are sometimes families that think that in order to survive in this culture, they have to have two incomes, and sometimes that may be true in some families. But I want to suggest that you may want to do an evaluation of at what price do we pay for no one being home when the kids get here? What price are we paying? There was a family down in Atlanta that had decided that they need to have two incomes. They had one vehicle, and the husband had a job, and so they decided, well, the wife needs to go work too, so we have more income. What they did is she got her job, then they wasn't very long before they decided they needed two vehicles because using one wasn't good enough, so they had two vehicles. She was not happy with the clothes that she had been wearing, didn't have enough variety, so she went out and bought her new wardrobe so that she could look right on the job. And then it wasn't very long before they figured out that with lunch monies and someone watching after the kids, it wasn't very long before they figured, well, we're going to have to take on some more work because we got two incomes, but we still have a need. And so they went out, he went out and got a paper route, started missing Sunday morning services, and before very long they come into their marriage is in trouble. And they want to talk. And you know what was really wrong with their marriage? They really were making more money when they were back before they started all that craziness, and their home was much happier when it was simpled down. Now, I don't know how your home is, but I do know that sometimes in that rush for gold, that we pay an awful price in terms of the destruction of the home and family and the loss of our children who look to someone else as mom and dad, and someone who doesn't love them necessarily, but who gets paid to take care of it. And we pay an awful price in terms of human bonding, in terms of not having natural affection for moms and dads, husbands and wives who are coming and going in the night, passing back and forth, going here and there, and often don't even know each other. As they've grown and as everybody changes over time, the family comes to be a household of strangers and a family of secrets. And that's dysfunction. Well, the subject of the woman's role, she's told to be a keeper at home, Titus 2 and verse 5. That does not say keep her at home. So a woman working outside the home, that's not a sin, but it may not always be the wisest thing in a family relationship. The wife is to be in subjection to the husband, Ephesians 5:22. A lot of times men will use that and beat up the women, but I just tell you, if you men want to beat somebody up, then don't do it too quick, because you might want to look at verse 20 and 21 of the same chapter that says, nevertheless, let each of us be in subjection one to the other. And then he talks about specifically about the husband there. So all of us need to have a subjective role to Jesus Christ, and in the home, the wife takes a subordinate position to the male who is the head of the house, according to these passages, 1 Peter 3 and verse 1 as well. The husband then is to be the primary provider. Now, the primary provider. I want you to notice that God did not command us husbands, or those who are husbands rather, God did not command the husband to make your wife be in subjection. He never said it. What he said is, wives, be in subjection to your own husband. And what he's saying here is this: when the husband acts right, the subjection will become natural. It is not a forced thing. It is a decision on the part of the wife to make that decision, not on the part of the husband to make the wife be in subjection. It's a command to the wife, not to the husband. So the wives are to be in subjection to their own husbands as the Lord. The husband is the primary provider, and he is to love his wife as Christ loves the church. I tell you what, when husbands love their wives like that, it won't be difficult for the woman to become subjected to a fellow that she believes worships the ground she walks on, so to speak. It's not hard to be in subjection to a man like that. It is hard to be in subjection to someone that doesn't have your best interest in mind, someone that you feel is treating you like an old doormat. That's hard to be in subjection to that kind of guy. And so husbands are told to love their wives as Christ loved the church. The husband, and get this one, the husband is supposed to be the spiritual leader of the family. You heard me right. Because in Ephesians 6 and verse 4, it says, and you fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but nurture them in the chastening and the admonition of the Lord. Now, that is a specific command to husbands. And what he's telling here is the husbands have the primary role here in teaching your kids the ways of God. And I'm afraid a lot of families that's gotten backwards, and the wife has that role. Nothing wrong with the wife doing it too, but the husband has the primary responsibility from Ephesians 6 and verse 4. We also notice that the husband is to nourish and cherish his wife. And we talked last night about how both are to be available to each other in intimacy, 1 Corinthians 7, verse 3 through 5. Children, on the other hand, well, let me back up to the father. Sometimes people say, well, I don't know what's wrong with my kids. I don't know where we went wrong. We treated them all alike. And sometimes that's the problem, that's exactly the problem. You treated them all alike. Children are not all the same. Children are different. And we need to treat them with respect to their differences. Let me show you how the Bible says that. In Ephesians, the 6th chapter, in verse 4 there, it talks about fathers not provoking their children to wrath. The companion verse to that's over in Colossians, I believe the 3rd chapter, and there it says, and you fathers provoke not your children, lest they be discouraged. Now look at those two differences. Colossians says, don't provoke your children lest they be discouraged. Ephesians 6 says, don't provoke them to wrath. Being discouraged and being wrath is not the same thing. What's he saying here? He's saying that children have different temperaments, have different styles. You push one kid too far, and they're going to come out at you in anger and rage and belligerence. You push another kid too far, and they're going to shrink down and have their spirit broken, and thus have trouble getting through life. because they're just kind of cowered down. Two different responses. And both of them triggered by a father who's pushed their kid too far. That happens in families. And what we can do is we can break our kid's spirit, or we can drive them to rage. And both of those extremes are forbidden. Now that doesn't authorize the kid to pull the trump card on us with that, but it does tell us that we need to be aware that not all children are the same. With children, they are to be obedient to their parents. And in Romans 1, verse 31, of all the people God gave up on, he lists in the middle of that list those who were disobedient to parents. And what that would denote is children who defy the authority of the home. And the text goes on to say, among other things there, for this cause God gave them up. Here's the message. If young people do not learn how to respect the authority of the home, then they don't learn how to respect authority. And what will happen is they'll step outside the home and they'll get into the school. And the school then will invoke authority. If they violate the laws of the school, then they're going to be in trouble in some other ways. And if they violate the authorities of the community, or the authority of the community, then they're going to find themselves out here in jail or in some kind of treatment center or somewhere where they're locked up. And often what happens is that young people do not learn in God's first institution how to respect authority, and therefore they don't respect it in any other of God's institutions. Young people are told to obey their parents. Parents need to avoid favoritism. We see what that does. Remember Jacob and Esau and how favoritism ripped that family right down the middle? Children need to be trained in the ways of the Lord. We talked about the father's role in that. And Deuteronomy 6, verse 4 through 8 talks about what takes place in the home. That you speak the Lord when you're out in the ways, when you're coming in, you're going out, you've got it over your doorpost. In other words, constant reminders of the fact God has spoken and we must obey. And I want to just ask the question as to how it is in your home. How would anybody know that the Lord's message is there in your home? Do you have things posted? Do you talk about the Lord in your home? Is that something you do? One of the things in my family of origin, we used to pass the Bibles out after dinner each evening, and we'd sit back and read a chapter of the Bible and discuss it together as a family. And of course, there were multiple levels of that, with all of us kind of in different ages. But that's one of the things that I think can be very helpful. Do you study your Bible daily? And do you pray daily? Do we teach our kids that as parents we're not perfect people? What do we do in this regard? I want to also suggest that in terms of children, that children are told to honor their father and their mother. And there's some parents that are hard to honor because of the craziness and addiction and mental illness and some other things going on. Some parents are most difficult to honor. But children are still told to honor their father and mother. That word honor means to have respect mingled with love. And if for no other reason, we honor the office. That this is the mom and this is the dad. And I need to underscore that. This is the mom. This is not the daughter's best friend or the son's best friend. This is the father. It is not the son or daughter's best friend. Often, the reason marriages or our families go astray is because of this thing of authority, that our children have learned to look upon us as friends rather than as parents. And therefore, the whole strain of authority gets broken down in the home. And then we see that with parenting, that we need to parent by setting positive examples. We need to nurture and care for our kids and provide a loving atmosphere in which they can thrive. And hopefully that would include a welcoming home for their friends as well as the family's friends to come in and be able to be there. One of the things, if we want to combat peer pressure, negative peer pressure, then what parents need to do is to invite the kids' friends into the home and there to combat with positive peer pressure. One of the questions young people often ask me is, well, if I don't do drugs and don't party, what else is there to do? And I want to tell you, quite frankly, sometimes I just kind of have to say, to hand it back to them and say, well, what do you think? And the reason I'm doing that is not because I necessarily want to know what they think, but because I'm dodging the question, because I don't always know the answer. But I think that it will behoove parents who have kids to answer that question, what else is there for me to do besides go out and get in trouble? What else is there for me to do besides go out and hang out with the gangbangers? What else is there for me to do besides ride around where they're passing the joint in the car? What else is there to do? Hopefully you'll have some answers for that, some options and some opportunities for your young people. If not, they're going to be going out playing with the world because young people will play. Bill's going to preach that another lesson. Every time I say it, I think grab that pad, I know it's coming up. All right, so Bill's going to develop that. So look at it in a pulpit near you. The other is that over time, the roles in families reverse. And in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 4, there we find that children are to requite their parents. What that means is children are to pay back their parents. Here's essentially what he's saying. There's a time when the young people are in diapers, they aren't necessarily thinking straight, they need some gender care and so forth. And then the time happens, and over toward the other part of time, as the parents get older, then they may have some of the similar things that were going on with the infant. And children are to requite their parents. I think it's a sad thing as parents get older for their kids to abandon them or want to stick them somewhere just to kind of get them out of the way. Parents hopefully never treated the kid that way. And in time, it's time to pay back the parents. It's not time just to keep stocking up for ourselves as children. When God's order is respected, then we can have the home as God wanted it, as God set it up. But what happens is that sometimes we bring contamination in the form of drunkenness or substance abuse of other sorts, or crazy or insane patterns. And that's what I want to talk about in the remainder of our time this evening. Because in the addicted home, we have some roles that become very dysfunctional. 1 in 4 children today live in a home where alcohol is used daily. These children are at greater risk for mental illness, for depression, for anxiety, for mood disorders, for health problems, for learning disorders, for substance abuse. And the primary reason here is because the equilibrium of the family has been thrown off. Many of you have mobiles out on your porch, you know, the little thing that hangs there and dangles in the wind and clings. If you want to just do something interesting, or just imagine with me, if we were to take a mobile and we were to take one of the pieces off, what would happen to the mobile? It would start doing this, wouldn't it? Until it found its balance. Now when it found balance, that balance may be way off, but it's still got a balance. And that's kind of how the family of the addicted person ends up. And that is that the addict is either taken off, or is away with their addiction, or away due to their addiction, whatever the deal, and the family begins kind of rocking and rolling, and the family readjusts. When we put that piece we took off, when we put it back on, that thing will do the same thing. That would be a demonstration of active addiction and active recovery, because both of those things throw the family out of balance. In the addicted family, we have terms such as codependency. We have families that have someone or ones who are helping the family to be out of balance or to be unstable. And that would be the person who is enabling. Here's the point I want to make here. That it is possible to love our addicted person to death. That is, that we love them so much that we finally do so much for them that they need to be doing for themselves, to where ultimately we have a funeral. When we have addicts in our family, it is our role to set the boundaries tight enough to where we are not a part of their sin. We are told by Paul, neither be you partaker in other men's sins, 1 Timothy 5:22. And we can become a partner in sin. Let me tell you how it happens. There's one mother that she was so afraid that the drug dealers were going to kill her kid because he didn't pay his drug bill, that she went down the corner and would meet the drug dealer and pay the kid's bill. Guess what the kid did? He realized he had just opened an account, so he'd go back to the dealer and says, Mom will take care of it. And so he'd buy his drugs and go out and use it. The drug dealer, all I had to do is call up and say, you know, I better have that money by 5 o'clock or your son's dead. And so Mom ran in there and paid the drug dealer. She was caught up in an awful mess. You know what they were doing? They were playing a game with Mom. And I told Mom to do something that she really winced at. And the first thing I told her is that since you've seen the dealer, you need to turn him in and identify him. And the second thing you need to do is you need to tell him to stay away from your son. And the third thing you need to do is you need to tell your son that he is cut off. You're no longer going to pay for his drugs, so don't charge anymore. And she was just up in arms. She thought, oh my, if I do that, then my son will die. And guess what? She did that and her son didn't die. They were just playing the game. Now that was a calculated risk, I will admit that. But she had been caught up in the game to where she actually became a part of the drug dealing. And I asked her, how do you look in orange? Or is it stripes this year? Or is it maroon? Because she could very much have gone to prison for being a part of drug deals. She was supplying the money. You get caught up in things that are illegal that you may be doing and thinking you're doing the right thing, thinking you're doing a good thing. Your family calls you in the middle of the night and says, I'm in jail. I got picked up for a DUI. And can you come get me? And you know what I tell families? That if you are strong enough and love your kid enough, or love your family member enough, the answer to that question is no. You got yourself there, you get yourself out. Sometimes folks look at me and think, well, that's not a very Christ-like way to be. But that is a tough love way to be, and here's the point I'm telling you. And that is that until the pain of the addiction becomes greater than the pleasure, they'll stay in their addiction. A night in jail isn't going to hurt. And don't get caught up by your TV and think you got rapists and all kinds of folks down there that are going to be molesting people. That usually doesn't happen down in county. It happens sometimes often in prison, but not in county. And so don't get caught up in thinking that that we got to go down and post bail and get somebody out of jail and yell at them and so forth. Most of them tell me that the yelling on the way home doesn't bother them so much as the fact that they're out and now they can go use what they want to. If you leave them there and let them detox in jail, then you may be doing the very best thing for them. I've had people who are addicted that will actually tell their families that later on in sessions, that the best thing you ever did for me is told me you weren't coming to get me. And I knew then that I had to do something. And that's when they went and got the treatment. Well, in families, and those are hard things to do, and you got to call those as you see them. But in families, what we have to do is to set tight boundaries. That the rules in this family mean something, and we're going to enforce the rules. Not because we're trying to be mean, but because these are the rules of this family. And if everybody understands what the rules are, then we can play the game. We can function, I should say, as a family. Often in families of addicted persons, the identified sick person or problem person is not the only one that is sick. Sometimes we have people that are in these families that the ones that are the sickest are the ones who are actually needing the addict to be sick in order that they might have something to do. That's what I mean by that. There's a young kid we were treating for seizure disorders, and in the course of treating him, we ultimately got him to where he had his seizures pretty well under control. And then we sent him back home with his family. A few weeks later, they came back for a checkup, and they told us that little Johnny, I'm using a fictitious name there, but they told us little Johnny was starting to have seizures again. We checked, and there was no physical reason why he should be having seizures. There was nothing going on his readings. But then as we talked a little bit with little Johnny, guess what we found out? We found out when the seizures were occurring. And they were occurring during the middle of Mom and Dad's fusses. And Mom and Dad were going at each other. And when it started getting physical, guess what little Johnny did? He would fall on the floor and have a seizure. Now, these new seizures were not seizures at all. They were pseudo-seizures. And what little Johnny had effectively learned is that his seizures were controlling the family. Because here's what else happened when he fell down on the floor. Mom and Dad stopped fighting, and Mom didn't get hurt. That family needed little Johnny to have seizures. They didn't know how to function or how to disengage until something like that happened. And so as a result, we had to teach that family basically how to be a family. And what we learned very quickly is they were a lot sicker than little Johnny was. And we had to work considerably with their dysfunction. Families of addicts often are families of secrets. And here's the unspoken rules the unspoken rules that are in these families. You grow up with this. It's not ever said, but it's understood. Don't feel, don't tell, don't trust, and don't change. Don't feel, don't tell, don't trust, and don't change. The family of the addicts often become families of secrets. Plastic families. The perfects, who will come to services with a grin on their face and leave home and leave and go home, and it's a virtual war zone. The kids often from those homes refer to those homes as hellhole. Who on earth that has any kind of sanity wants to grow up in a hellhole? That's how that's often described. Now, the Bible describes home as an oasis. And it's no wonder that the kids can't wait to get out of the house if the house is so full of turmoil and chaos. The family becomes the family of secrets. And so the very foundations of love, which is about trust, if we learn not to trust, then we don't have the basis to have any kind of normal love, because that's the foundation of love. And if I'm not able to trust, I don't know who to trust. Now I grew up suspicious of everything around me, and I'm in hyper alert, and I'm second guessing everything. And when I don't feel, then I can get a point where I go past feelings that I don't respond normally to the things, to the stimulus that is around me. And when I don't tell, what that teaches me to do is to hide their sins, or to use those for blackmail. But I've taught some pretty sick lessons in this, and then those get played out in the family, and the family then becomes a family of facades. Now, we don't want anybody to talk bad about our family, so we become the perfects, but really the word is we become the fakes. We become the hypocrite family who goes out here and we put on our little song and dance routine, and then we go home and we got all kinds of chaos. Jesus talked about that with the Pharisees, that they weren't real people. And I want to tell you what, folks, until families get real, families will continue to implode on themselves. We need to talk about the things that are bothering us. We need to take these things where they're no longer secrets. Here's a husband or wife that's ashamed of their mate going out on the internet and doing all sorts of sordid, wild things. Those things, while they need to be addressed first in the family, when it can't be addressed at that level, it is time to snatch your family out of the fire by getting the help you need. Because ultimately you will lose your family. If you don't believe that, come see me. And I will point you to several families that will be willing to talk with you, and who went through some of the very same things, that they tried to sit on all this stuff in their family, tried to sit on the chaos and the craziness, and ultimately it blew up in their face, and their family is dispersed and destroyed by the problems of divorce. Insanity surrounds the addict. The addict often will hide stashes. I don't know of any good addict that doesn't have a stash, actually more than one stash. They'll hide their subject that they think they're abusing. They'll hide it. And so in the home where it ought to be, regardless of what your local laws might be, I believe parents have a right to search their house and to look for the stashes. You're going to find them under floorboards. You may find them if people are driving that are addicts. You'll find them in the wheel wells. You'll find them up in the top of the rafters, or whatever the tops of the garages are called. You might find them in drop-down ceilings and find them tucked back up in there. But you'll find stashes that have been tucked away just in case the addict needs it a little later, or on a day when they can't purchase the substances. Other things, the insanity that surrounds the addict is the family spends their downtime trying to find the stash, trying to search around. Are they using? Let's go check out the room. And then we begin, well, where is he? Where is she? And so sometimes we end up following them down the street, checking on them, doing some sort of stalking activity. And then we have the preoccupation when they are home. What are they doing? Are they asleep now? Are they passed out? Is this going on? Is that going on? And when they're away, then we're concerned about them too. And the bottom line is, that's not what normal people do. So here's the codependent that is spending their time trying to play catch me if you can all over the family, and in the meantime, they're not taking care of their business. Then there's feelings of guilt, shame, and worthlessness that come to the family when you do find this kind of these things in the house, or catch the person in their use. And then there's the isolation and the withdrawal, and ultimately the guilt and the shame that goes with this. The codependent or the enabler is not the only one, because there are others that are in the family too. As a matter of fact, one of the secrets in the family is this game. We have an elephant in the room, but we're not going to talk about it. We have this huge issue here, but we're not going to talk about it. Because when we talk about it and address it, it causes chaos in the family, and someone's going to blow up, and maybe someone's going to leave the house. So what we'll do is we'll just ignore the problem that's getting bigger and bigger till we got an elephant in the living room, but we're not going to talk about it. And when that happens, and it does happen in the addicted family, then ultimately we have to deflate the elephant, and we have to give the family permission to talk to each other, of all things. But in the meantime, the codependent is not the only one that is growing up sideways in this sideways mobile, because there's the lost child out here. There are roles that the children develop as maladaptive coping styles in this family. And the lost child is the child that you don't even really realize if they're there or not. They're usually the quiet one that just kind of sits back. Those are the ones that concern me, because as they get to be adults, they've got a whole bunch of information in their head and their life and their memories that's not been processed. And they will come out at the strangest times. Often, these are the ones that really have a major break, a major mental or emotional break along about midlife. And some people call that midlife crisis. Actually, it's that the tools that they learned as children, that those tools are no longer working, and they begin to break. And sometimes that happens in their married life later, but it's a response to years and years of just stuffing things down inside. That's your lost child. Then you have one that takes on the role of trying to make the family look good. Because we're working around this addict, and the addict's making us look bad, so now the lost child just says, well, I just won't be any problem. And the superhero comes out and says, well, I'm going to charge in here and make everybody look good. So this is the one that may be out here, got to make the honor roll all the time, got to be the overachiever, got to bring home all the trophies, got to make the family look good. And so they're the hero, the champion of the family, that is the pride and joy of this family. And they stand out that way. Then we'll have one that will play a role of a mascot. And that is, this is the little one that's the family pet. And usually it's the youngest one. And this is the one that can get by with just about anything because they're so cute. Then you have somebody that says phooey on all this, and they're the family rebel. And they go out and begin rebelling and just, forget this, and they act against the family. And there are many, many roles that people can play, and sometimes they play more than one, or they vacillate back and forth on these roles, but nevertheless they are maladaptive roles. And here's what happens when they grow up to be adults. They become extremely vulnerable, children in these families. They become preoccupied with illnesses. They often tend to be very self-centered. They may have a fierce devotion to the alcoholic. In other words, we're going to protect dad's name or whoever the addict is. We're going to protect their name and defend them regardless. They may have powerful feelings of guilt and be overly responsible, very intense, kind of be almost the mother hen or the father rooster complex. The price is high, and the big piece here is that they have lost their childhood in the process of living around the addiction. They've lost their childhood, lost their innocence, and as adults, guess what's going to happen to them? More than likely, as they grow up and find homes of their own, they will find a home that is the very thing that they're trying to get out of. And sometimes people say, well, why is that? It's because we tend to find that which is familiar. And so here we have a child who comes up saying, oh, I'm never going to marry anybody that's an alcoholic. I'm never going to get with anybody that's a drug addict. I'm never going to, whatever the deal is, the addiction is. And lo and behold, they grow up and they find that very person that they were saying that they didn't want in their life. And the cycle continues over and over. Did you ever read in the Old Testament where it says, I will visit the sins of the fathers upon the third and fourth generation? I read that for many years and I thought, well, somehow that doesn't seem right. That here's these innocent people that have never been born yet, that God's going to visit the sins of the parents upon them. And then as I got in this field, I really understand what that means. When I deal with children of divorce, when I deal with children of addiction, what I begin to notice that what someone did in this generation carries on to their children, and the seeds of that are still in the family, still a family pattern, and it carries on to the grandchildren, and then about that fourth generation, it starts leveling out if nobody in the above generations has picked up the same pattern of using. And if that happens, then it starts again at different levels. So essentially, we're talking here about family patterns, how families cope with life, how they deal with problems. And if we're teaching them that the way you cope with life, the way you deal with problems, is with a bottle or with a pipe or with a needle in your arm or some other form of use of drugs, and we're teaching that's how you cope with life, then the next generation learns it, and the next generation learns it, and we may react to it, but the pattern's still there, and we pass that on to generations yet to be born. So what are we going to do with folks like this? I want to suggest to you that in families like this, that we can literally love our loved one to death. That is, that we do so much for them that they never feel the pain of their addiction, and ultimately the addiction takes them to the grave or to the institution. We can put our, here's some things people do, a danger to watch out for, is that we can put our family member above our relationship to God. How many times have you ever seen people that will stand right solid by the Bible until something happens in their family, and all of a sudden they've misunderstood these Bible verses for years? I've seen it, and evidently some of you all have too. But the Bible doesn't change. God's truth doesn't change. And we don't have the prerogative to be changing it. What we find is that God's Word is going to be the same. Matthew 10, verse 37 through 39, he that loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he that loves sons or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And on we go. And talks about that there's a cross that we must bear. And sometimes the cross we have to bear is that in order to follow God, we had to stand against our family. We had to set boundaries and limits that God has already set, and our family's not happy with us, and they may not like us even to be in the family anymore. But those boundaries and limits need to be set. In 1 Timothy 5, verse 22, we can become partaker in other people's sins. And then I've also seen this, that when the church is doing what the church needs to do to block the persons who are caught up in the addiction and the enabling and all that kind of stuff, when the church does what it's supposed to do to block that, then some of your worst enemies that can come out of that are the very people who are in the families that you're trying to help. And those things need to never be, if we're all standing for the Lord. I've seen people who will lie for their families. Ephesians 4:29 talks about putting away lying and speak truth with your neighbor. But there are people that will lie. They'll call up work the next day and say, oh, so-and-so's not feeling well today. That's not true. They're down in jail. So-and-so's not feeling well today. Well, that's because they got a drunk on. Or so-and-so is not going to be able to come into work today because they didn't come home last night. But we don't say those parts. And a family can get caught up in making lies and alibis for their family members and thus become partaker of their sins. In 2 John 11, we learn a simple thing that if I want to paraphrase it, this is what it would be. If we excuse their sins, then we share their guilt. It is not our job to clean up their mess. If they made the mess, it's their job to clean up. And the more that we do for them, the more we help them to stay in their sick relationship. And what that simply means is, as family members, we have to be tough and we have to be willing to spend the sleepless nights. I do not say that as something I haven't done. There have been cases that I've had to make some of these same decisions in. And I've had to tell family members, you are welcome here, but your addiction's not. And if it's going to be here, then you're not going to be here. And so, just like Joshua of old, choose ye this day whom ye shall serve. But as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. And if someone in our house doesn't want to serve the Lord, they need to find another house. Let's take a